I understand that UNDP also uses capacity building here in countries to understand how to incorporate considerations in developing these policies, et cetera. Would people here in the West be shocked as to how more evolved these governments are in terms of motivation long term and versus the West in that same vein?
Well, to begin with, you're making a very important point. The biggest drivers of poverty nowadays, some of the biggest drivers of poverty are climate change. There's no question that the more vulnerable people end up suffering disproportionately from the impact of climate change. If you are recently Ethiopia in 2012 has welcomed 275,000 refugees from the drought in the Horn of Africa. From Djibouti to Somalia to Yemen, all the Horn of Africa, people have been displaced, already living in fragile ecosystems, and now finding themselves suffering from the effect of drought. When I was working in India, you had June to December, too much rain. Flooded the rice paddies, flooded the road, flooded the villages. 3 months later, not enough water. By March, there was nothing to grow. Everything was parched. The climate change is widening those extreme movements, and it's the poor who are suffering the most from it. The governments are really aware of that and want to combat it. We've done a lot of work to demonstrate the link between climate change and poverty. And I think nowadays there's very little doubt among the governments of the program countries we work in that this is really, that is the issue and that they want to solve it. At the same time, I apologize for the long answer rather. At the same time, it is true that the government of the South are sometimes saying, well, you have been polluting for 200 years. And all of a sudden, now that we are the one about to have growth, you're saying, no, you cannot pollute anymore. So there's part of the discussion around the Sustainable Development Goals and the Convention on climate change is the government of the South saying, we understand that we need to combat climate change, but give us some space for growth. So this is what we're trying to negotiate.
You had mentioned in the last round that you guys get so absorbed in what it is you're doing that often you don't take the time to show what you're doing. And I recall as a very young child back in the 80s that we would see commercials online for what the UN did and here's where we are and here's what we're doing. I haven't seen that in so long, and the reason I bring that up is because I'll stick stateside, is that I think there are a number of Americans, because obviously we're not expecting to see UN vans driving down our street to come help us, that think that the UN pretty much just encapsulates sitting around and sending out sanctions against various countries, and that's all you do.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about not taking the time to sort of show this is what we do, this is where we're at, and this is what we can accomplish, to sort of educate other countries that are more developed that don't necessarily need you in their backyard?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, we all hate UNICEF. Because they do such a good job. Sometimes I tell my mother-in-law, I once told her, I'm like UNICEF, but for government. So, I'm like UNICEF, but for disaster, okay? Because it's easier. It's sometimes difficult to explain, like I'm trying to do, the capacity building of governments. It's just people lose you a little bit. So we're trying to do better. The other problem, of course, is that development takes a long time. So now that I'm older, I revisit some countries I've been in, and I see the growth. When we were in Vietnam, after the war, was Vietnam in '83, 8 years after the war, and we started projects for coffee and rubber plantation, and now Vietnam is the third largest exporter of Robusta coffee. So you see the growth. I've been to Africa, and I see how so many countries are doing really well. But it's a story of, look, this is what we've done for the past 20 years and see the results. It's very difficult. The narrative of development is a very difficult thing to do, I do agree. Unfortunately, the narrative of disaster relief is easier. And that is a bit my problem. We need to shift the discussion, because to rush and help somebody who's already hurt, already lost their house, it's good, but it's too late. How do you explain that last year there was a super cyclone in India, in the state of Orissa? Major cyclone, in the same place where in 1999, 30,000 people died. Last year, the cyclone Hudud, nobody heard about it. And that's the story. The story is there is no story. And how do you tell a story of no story? How do you tell a story of 30,000 people were saved because the government evacuated 200,000 people out of the state of Orissa? It's a huge operation by the Indian government, supported by the international community. But as I said, it's a story of no story. Very difficult to transmit. Or at least we're not very good at it, you're right.